Karl Rove, welcome to California for the California Republican Party Convention. We appreciate you sitting down with us at the Flash Report yet again.
There we go, exactly.
Yet again. We're here obviously for the California Republican Party's organizational convention.
Right.
What brings you here?
Well, I was ordered to be here by Jim Brulte, which he has that ability with a lot of people. I happened to be in the state for a speech to a business group on Friday, and then to a Christian school on Saturday night. And when Jim found out I was coming, he said, "You're coming to the convention, and you're also going to do a fundraiser for the #1 Democrat target in the Assembly, Mike Morrell of Riverside County."
So maybe this is a kind of an indicator of the next 10 years of your life. You may be in California more often.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, so you've had opportunities to work with Jim Brulte over the years.
For a long time, and he was, as you know, a young aide to President Bush 41, and was a big supporter of President Bush 43. Was one of the original backers of George W. Bush for president, and a close friend of mine and a very close friend of 43's. Last night at this fundraiser for Mike Morrell, when I stood up, I said, "I'm here for one reason only. Jim Brulte told me to be here." How many of you have ever worked for Jim Brulte in any way capacity, paid or unpaid, volunteer or compulsory? And the whole room raised their hand.
Oh.
I said, "So you're all familiar with the experience of being told by Brulte you have to do something?" And they all raised their hand. It was very funny.
Well, that's good.
That's his home turf, of course.
And there's a lot of people excited about his chairmanship and what that's going to mean for moving forward. Obviously, we've got a big challenge here in California.
Yeah. Well, if you got a big challenge, you need a big leader. And Brulte has got a ton of smarts and several tons of leadership. I'm really delighted that, our party suffers when we don't have the best people moving onto the field. And, not a comment on the current leadership, but I mean, when you face a big challenge like this, you got to have somebody with the street smarts and the ability to raise money and the strategic thinking that Jim has.
Sure. You wrote a column after, everybody kind of had something to say after the last November's elections. You wrote a column that, you kind of made some observations about the destructive primary process and
right.
maybe some things to look at in that. And I thought maybe you could comment on that.
Well, look, I think primaries are constructive. What was destructive about the 2012 primary season was I think 22 presidential debates. Every week we had some news organization sort of forcing everybody onto a stage someplace and then peppering them with questions that made us look weird. I mean, we turned control of the dialogue over to the anchors of these various programs. And if you look at the relationship between, questions about contraception and abortion versus questions about deficit, debt, spending, the Affordable Care Act, it made us look like we were all spending all of our time in a telephone booth worrying about contraception and completely ignored the huge economic issues the country had. Now, I'm a social conservative. I believe in these issues. But I also understand that the media can and did make us look weird on these issues. And so next time around, we ought to do what the Democrats did in 2004, and that is limit the number of debates. Terry McAuliffe stepped in and said there are going to be a finite number of debates, and we're going to exercise control over who gets to host those debates and hence have some leverage over who the moderators are. I think that'd be equally constructive for us. We'll have plenty of opportunities
right.
at forums and so forth in states to have candidates. We'll have the town hall meetings that become now the sine qua non of presidential campaigning. So we'll have plenty of time to ask the candidates questions, but it'll be Republicans asking the questions, not a bunch of generally liberal moderators from the national networks.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a good idea. You also mentioned something about maybe trying to move the convention a little earlier.
Yeah, convention earlier. We used to have conventions in June and July. And then because of federal financing, a presidential candidate's general election campaign was paid for from the Treasury starting in 1980. And until 2008, every Republican and Democratic presidential candidate took that public financing for the general election. So the object was minimize the time frame for the general election. So both parties migrated their conventions to late in August. In fact, this past year, we literally were meeting in September, both Democrats and Republicans. But neither candidate took public financing. And what happened is that by having our convention so late, Mitt Romney secured the nomination in the spring, but he was out of money. He had plenty of money in his general election account, people who had written a check for the
right.
primary and the general election, but he couldn't touch that until Thursday night of the convention at the end of August. And so Obama had $200 million that he put up on television starting on May 15th to irradiate Romney. And Romney had very little ability to respond until his fundraising got underway, and by that time it was June and July, that before he got serious TV buzz of his own. So if we move the convention earlier, that means the start of the general election starts earlier, and you can tap that general election money.
So this might be one of those byproducts. I know there was some controversy at the National Convention when the convention voted to give more authority to the committee to make decisions on the party's rules. But one byproduct is the RNC actually could move the convention.
Well, actually, the date of the convention is not set by the convention. It is set by the Republican National Committee itself. So they've already had the ability to do this. In fact, they have the ability to set the location and set the date and do so based on negotiations with the potential host city. So we already had this ability to do that. I frankly am not, I don't know all of I didn't follow the rules battle that closely, but when I was on the National Committee as the College Republican National Chairman, ex officio member, I was a member of the Rule 29 Committee, which was the last time that there was an attempt to change the rules. I'm sort of a believer that these changes in the rules ought to be made at the National Convention by the party writ large, not simply by the 3 members from each state. But
as somebody from a state that's very large,
yeah,
we would concur with you,
since
we're disadvantaged by a system.
So now, and we'll see how it plays out. But this is an authority that was given by the convention. It may be revoked by the next one.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Obviously, there's been a little bit of media ever since I think it was the New York Times broke kind of the story of this conservative victory fund project that you're working on, and I thought maybe you could take a moment to kind of share your perspective on both what you're doing and about maybe some of the controversy.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the object is to make certain that we get candidates who get these nominations who can win. We're giving away too many races by well-meaning candidates who can't win, and in some instances, candidates who do destructive things to the rest of our party. Todd Akin, for example, in Missouri, was not the Tea Party candidate. That was the state treasurer, Sarah Steelman, endorsed by Sarah Palin. A lot of local Tea Party groups were supporting, along with the U.S. Chamber, a businessman named John Bruner. Todd Akin was running third in the primary. He was going to lose, but he had an unlikely savior named Harry Reid, Senate Majority Leader, Democrat of Nevada, who came in and spent $2 million attacking Todd Akin during the Republican primary in a way calculated to gain him support. Oh, he's never supported a tax increase. He's always voted pro-life. He is so conservative, he supported a balanced budget amendment. Todd Akin, too conservative for Missouri. Now, what had happened is that meant that he, the weakest candidate with the least amount of money, had a message delivered for him by Harry Reid, because why? He was the only candidate.
Reid wanted to pick the person he ran against.
Yeah, he wanted to pick the weakest possible candidate, and sure enough, he'd had a history of saying outrageous things. He was an earmarker. He was not a, I had to deal with him in the White House. A very nice fellow, strongly socially conservative, an avowed fiscal conservative. But if you wanted his vote, he had to deal with an earmark request. Well, he got nominated. He was the one guy that they could conceivably beat, and sure enough, he took out a gun and shot himself by saying there's such a concept as legitimate rape and illegitimate rape, and a woman's body can tell the difference between the two. And if it's an illegitimate rape, she won't conceive. I mean, that is
so I think some of the concern, which is a legitimate concern, is that kind of in previous cycles you had like the Senate leadership folks, like Florida, when they got out early for Charlie Crist over Marco Rubio.
Yeah.
I mean, do you envision that in that? I mean, at some level,
I understand the concern.
Right.
But I'd make 2 points. One is American Crossroads is the biggest benefactor of Tea Party candidates. We put over $30 million into Senate races of Tea Party candidates. Sharon Angle in Nevada, $5 million. $8 million in Colorado for Ken Buck. We were the largest outside group supporting Rand Paul, $2.7 million. We're the biggest group supporting Marco Rubio, $2.9 million. We put more money into Pat Toomey's campaign in Pennsylvania, the former chairman of the Club for Growth, than the Club for Growth did, the group that he used to head. So we have, and $25 million to Tea Party candidates for Congress, for the U.S. House. You mentioned Marco Rubio. We had a situation in 2009 when the Washington, D.C. types gathered around Charlie Crist. Now, Crossroads was not involved in primaries, has not been involved in primaries, but I was. I gave money early to Marco Rubio and helped raise money because I knew Charlie Crist, I knew Marco Rubio, I knew who the conservative was, I knew Charlie Crist was a moderate, that he probably couldn't win. He was such a wishy-washy guy. He would not send out a strong message. Marco Rubio,
he's a Democrat today now.
Yeah, a Democrat today. And Marco Rubio, I thought, was the most effective communicator in our party since Ronald Reagan. So I went out and raised him money early. Tim Scott. I met Tim Scott when he was a county council member in Charleston County, South Carolina. African-American conservative, a lot of potential, strong leader, really fine human being. So when he ran in a primary with a lot of, quote, establishment, state reps and state senators and so forth, I gave him my own personal check because I strongly. So my point is that we've earned the right to participate in this primary process. The second thing is you better be consistent. If you don't want Crossroads has spent over $400 million for Republican candidates in 2010 and 2012. If you don't want Crossroads to be involved in primaries, then you got to be consistent and say no outside group should be, and nobody's saying that. What happened is our donors said, look, we're happy to keep writing checks, but we're upset with us finding ourselves in a place where we're writing checks for Missouri. We spent $3.3 million in Missouri before Todd Aiken said what he said and blew up our chances of winning. We didn't participate in the primary in Indiana. Other groups did. They walked away in the general election from Richard Murdoch. We spent $5.9 million on his behalf until right up to the end. Even though 2 weeks out he went and made in a debate the comment that, well, if a woman is raped and conceives, it's God's will, which is so judgmental and so off-putting that it just blew up his chances. But I'll tell you this, our attitude is, I like the Buckley rule. We like the Buckley rule. Find the most electable conservative. And sometimes that means standing up to, quote, these so-called establishment choices. In Indiana, there were two people responsible for losing that race. One was Richard Murdoch, and the other was Richard Lugar. Here's the incumbent United States Senator, who's a great man, who had served his state and our country with great distinction, but he was in his 80s, and he'd lost touch. One of his supporters told me, the problem with Dick is that he hasn't been to speak at a Lincoln Day dinner since sometime in the late 1980s. The Republican National Committee woman told me, elected in 2008, she said, I've never met Dick Lugar. He was registered to vote at a house that he had not owned since 1973 in a state that had seen a spat of incidents where literally office holders, state legislators, were tossed out of office for having registered at phony addresses in order to, handle redistricting. Sure. So, he was a great man, but he had not gone home. He'd not stayed in touch. He'd lost touch with grassroots. And if he had stepped aside, we would have had a robust primary. Maybe Mitch Daniels running. David McIntosh certainly would have run. We would have had a robust primary with a lot of good candidates, and we would have been able to hold a seat. But instead, in a state where we win the governor's race, win all the constitutional offices, keep a supermajority in the state Senate, take a supermajority in the state House, carry the state by double digits for Mitt Romney, we lose a U.S. Senate race by nearly double digits.
No, that's a pretty amazing amazing collapse there.
Yeah.
So, Karl, we know you got a lot to do with the convention here.
And Brulte has got me a terrible schedule. I mean, let's see if here we go. Here's the Brulte schedule. But fortunately, my plane got in at 1 o'clock, so rather than starting at 7:40, you made me start at 9 a.m. So.
Well, we're happy that you started with us, and thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Find us on the web at www.flashreport.org.